Some fools think throwing around million-dollar buzzwords in tailored suits makes them masters of the universe. They forget a core truth of modern corporate America. The person holding the master access codes and server data is the actual God. Listen closely. I am going to show you how an arrogant fraud gets stripped of absolutely everything. There will be no screaming and no exhausting lawsuits dragging on for 2 years. Just one single click. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Stella Rivera. I am 36 years old, and I am the sole owner of the Nebula Research Park. You would never guess I own the place by looking at me right now. This facility is a high-end biomedical research complex, a fortress of frosted glass, brushed steel, and negative pressure clean rooms where the brightest minds in the country play God with cellular biology. Right now, the air in the main corridor smells faintly of clinical-grade bleach and electrical ozone. It is a sterile, unforgiving environment, and maintaining it requires a brutal attention to detail. That is exactly why I am currently standing on an aluminum step stool in the middle of the main hallway, wearing an oversized, stiff white lab coat stained with pink industrial disinfectant. My dark hair is shoved into a messy, uneven bun. I have grease smeared across my knuckles. I am manually recalibrating the fine particulate filtration vents because I do not trust the automated sensors to catch microscopic pathogens. I built this place from the ground up, fighting city planners and zoning boards for 5 years to create a sanctuary for genuine science, and I know its metallic heartbeat better than anyone. The heavy silence of the hallway shatters when the elevator doors slide open. A loud, echoing laugh bounces off the sterile white walls. Enter Bryce. Bryce is the newly minted chief executive officer of a longevity and biohacking startup that recently subleased space on the 6th floor. He walks like a man who genuinely believes he is personally curing human mortality. He is flanked by a loud entourage of yes men, all carrying sleek tablets and overpriced green juices. Bryce is wearing a paper-thin, ethically sourced cashmere sweater that probably costs $2,000, and a massive biometric smartwatch that supposedly tracks his cellular age. He exudes the specific, suffocating arrogance of modern American corporate wealth. I step down from the stool, wiping my hands on the rough fabric of my coat. Bryce stops mid-sentence. He looks at me, his eyes dragging up and down my stained lab coat, my scuffed boots, and my messy hair. The calculation in his head takes less than 1 second. He categorizes me into the lowest possible caste of his universe, the night shift medical waste janitor. To a man like Bryce, people like me are invisible, just another slow-moving gear in the machinery designed to clean up his messes. "Hey," Bryce says, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the ventilation system. He actually snaps his fingers at me. 2 quick, sharp snaps. "You need to get the biohazard bins out of the main lobby right now. We have a Tier 1 group of angel investors arriving in 20 minutes, and I cannot have the entrance smelling like an autopsy room." I just stare at him. Bryce sighs, rolling his eyes at his sycophants. "God, it is impossible to find fast manual labor anymore. Look, do you speak English? Move the trash. Now." I do not yell. I do not rip off my stained coat and dramatically reveal my status as the owner of this $50 million estate. In my experience, anger is a luxury for the powerless. Power, true power, is absolute silence. Instead, I let my gaze drop to his hip. I memorize the alphanumeric code printed on the edge of his subtenant keycard. "Understood," I say, my voice perfectly flat. "I will take care of it." I nod politely, pick up my toolkit, and step backward into the shadows of the utility control room. The heavy metal door clicks shut, sealing me inside the nerve center of the building. The utility room is dark, illuminated only by the glow of 3 massive server monitors. I sit down at the terminal and type in my master administrative credentials. I pull up the subtenant master files and isolate the lease agreement for Bryce's longevity startup. According to the digital paperwork he signed exactly 2 months ago, his company is leasing 4,000 square feet of standard administrative office space, desks, computers, maybe a small coffee machine, nothing more. But as I cross-reference his lease with the building's live utility draw, a massive discrepancy appears on my screen. A standard office does not pull industrial levels of power, nor does it require reinforced drainage. Bryce is lying. He is secretly transforming that corporate office into something entirely different, and in a federally regulated biotech facility, lies are not just annoying, they are illegal, and as the landlord, I am about to tear his little kingdom down. The control room feels like the digital brain of the entire property. I sit in the stark blue glow of 3 massive monitors. Through the building's artificial intelligence infrastructure management system, I can watch the complex breathe. The software visualizes every single metric in real time. It monitors the rhythmic flow of the ventilation, the steady pulse of electrical currents, and the pressurized circulation of specialized chemicals. I route the interface to focus entirely on the 6th floor. Almost immediately, a flashing yellow anomaly catches my eye. There is a continuous, unexplained drop in the liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen main supply lines. Those specific elements are heavily regulated. They are strictly allocated only to the licensed, high-security laboratories operating on the lower levels. A software firm has zero use for sub-zero chemical coolants. Yet, the pressure sensors clearly indicate that hundreds of liters of restricted gases are being aggressively siphoned straight up into Bryce's supposedly empty office suite over the past 14 days. I need a visual. I bypass the standard hallway cameras and access the thermal security grid. Normal optical lenses can be covered or fooled, but heat signatures are impossible to hide. I scrub the footage backward, rewinding through the past 72 hours. During normal business hours, his suite registers as standard room temperature. But when I jump the timeline to 2 o'clock in the morning, the screen erupts in a blinding white glare. Bryce's office is emitting a massive localized heat signature, blazing like an industrial furnace. Worse, the exterior cameras show sleek black town cars pulling up to the rear service entrance long after midnight. Anonymous figures wearing heavy coats and dark glasses are escorted straight to the private elevators, bypassing all standard entry protocols. The puzzle pieces are assembling into a very dangerous picture. I crack my knuckles and decide to tear down the digital wall. Since I physically own the fiber optic cables routing his internet, bypassing his commercially available firewall takes me exactly 4 minutes. I slide quietly into his internal network, cloaking my access point. I open his private corporate drive, and the entire facade crumbles. Bryce is not building a tech startup. He is operating an underground, highly illegal biohacking clinic right over my head. His encrypted inventory manifests on my screen. He has smuggled in unapproved hyperbaric oxygen chambers, deep freeze cryotherapy pods, and intravenous blood transfusion centrifuges. His internal client notes detail a horrific array of unregulated treatments. He is selling young blood plasma therapies, synthetic hormone injections, and illegal stem cell flushes to desperate, aging executives. Absolutely none of this is cleared by the Food and Drug Administration. He is playing God in a space designed for paperwork, charging the ultra-wealthy hundreds of thousands of dollars per session based on pure pseudoscience. My heart rate spikes, but not from shock. It is cold. Hard panic. I dive directly into his sanitation logs. In any legitimate biomedical facility, hazardous material like used syringes, contaminated blood bags, and plasma vials must be documented and removed by certified incineration teams. I check the building's vendor registry. Bryce has never hired a hazard disposal unit. I pull up the architectural plumbing schematics for the 6th floor. The realization hits me like a physical punch to the chest. He is flushing raw biological waste directly into the standard municipal drainage pipes. He is washing human blood and contaminated needles down the ordinary sinks and toilets. If federal environmental inspectors detect even one microscopic trace of hazardous medical waste in the public graywater, They will not just fine him. The government will padlock my entire $50 million complex, arrest my legitimate scientists, and revoke my operating licenses forever. He is gambling my life's work just to save a few $100s on proper waste management. You arrogant fool, I whisper to the glowing monitors. I dig one layer deeper, into his outbound email server, to see his endgame. He is not keeping this operation quiet. He is actively scaling it up. Sitting in his outbox is a digital invitation for a massive, lavish rejuvenation summit taking place inside his office this coming Friday. He has invited dozens of tech billionaires, elite investors, and minor celebrities. His itinerary promises a night of exclusive intravenous vitamin drips, illegal plasma infusions, and champagne. He intends to use my stolen electricity, my stolen oxygen, and my building's prestige to dazzle these investors and secure $10 million in seed funding. He thinks he is a genius, untouchable and brilliant. He has no idea that the silent janitor he insulted an hour ago now holds his entire criminal enterprise in the palm of her hand. Most rational people would immediately dial 911. They would let the authorities raid the place, shut down the floor, and deal with the endless paperwork. But rational people do not understand the sheer satisfaction of psychological warfare. If I called the authorities right now, Bryce could claim it was a misunderstanding. He had expensive lawyers. He could pivot, hide the evidence, and tie me up in litigation for 3 years. No, I needed him reckless. I needed him to dig his own grave so deep that no corporate attorney could ever pull him out. So, I decided to play God with his little ecosystem. I began with the climate control and environmental aesthetics. Bryce had paid a premium for our smart glass windows, which automatically tinted to block glare and regulate temperature. I accessed the override protocols. I wrote a tiny, invisible script in the building's operating system, every single day, at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when the western sun was at its absolute harshest. The blinds in his specific suite would retract completely. The smart tint would disable. A blinding, searing rectangle of pure sunlight would blast directly onto his glossy, temperature-sensitive, hyperbaric chambers. I watched through the internal cameras as his technicians scrambled frantically, throwing expensive cashmere blankets over the overheating machines while the internal warning alarms beeped endlessly. They tried to manually override the wall panels, but the system just smiled back with a green checkmark, insisting everything was functioning perfectly. Next, I went after his connectivity. In the modern business world, bandwidth is oxygen. I could have just cut his internet entirely, but a total blackout is a technical issue. A localized, intermittent stutter is psychological torture. I used my administrative rights to isolate the specific internet protocol addresses of Bryce's personal laptop, his gold-plated smartphone, and his sleek presentation tablet. I did not touch the connection of his sycophants. I only throttled him. I choked his upload speeds down to exactly 12 kilobytes per second, the equivalent of internet from the year 1998. Through the audio feeds, I listened to the chaos. He would be in the middle of a crucial online webinar, pitching his anti-aging snake oil to venture capitalists in Tokyo or London, and right as he reached the climax of his presentation, his screen would freeze. His face would pixelate into a blurry, distorted block. His audio would drop. I watched him physically slam his fists onto his custom oak desk, screaming at his staff while their laptops worked perfectly fine. He was being technologically isolated, gaslit by the very infrastructure he thought he commanded. But visual and digital frustration was not enough. I wanted to ruin his aura. Bryce prided himself on creating a holistic, zen environment. He had essential oil diffusers pumping out custom blends of sandalwood and crushed eucalyptus to make his wealthy clients feel like they were in a spiritual retreat. I logged into the 6th floor air handler. I slightly increased the voltage to the electrostatic filters specifically above his suite, generating a microscopic, entirely non-toxic surplus of ozone gas. I pumped it directly through his vents. Ozone has a very distinct, metallic scent. It smells exactly like a jammed, overheating office laser printer. Within 24 hours, his spiritual sanctuary smelled like a broken copy room in a depressed accounting firm. the sandalwood could not mask it. It just smelled like someone was printing 1,000 pages of burning eucalyptus. He completely unraveled. The polished, Zen guru facade melted away. He began calling the ground floor reception desk 10 times a day. I routed all his calls directly to a secure server. Listening in real time, he would scream, curse, and threaten to sue the useless landlady for breach of contract. He called me every derogatory name in the corporate playbook, demanding immediate repairs, demanding compensations of $50,000 for his ruined webinars. He had no idea that I was legally recording every single syllable of his unhinged rants under the building's security monitoring clause. He was voluntarily handing me hours of admissible evidence of his hostile behavior. Then, he made the fatal mistake I was waiting for. Driven mad by the lagging internet and the locked utility panels, Bryce decided the building management was incompetent. He took matters into his own hands. On a Tuesday afternoon, camera feed number 42 showed him marching down the hall with two burly, unlicensed external electricians carrying heavy tool bags. They approached the main structural telecom box, a heavy steel cabinet strictly regulated by city fire codes. "Just pry the damn thing open," I heard Bryce order them through the hidden microphone. "I do not care. Break the lock. I need to route my own fiber lines right now." I watched as they took a titanium crowbar and snapped the master lock off the utility panel. I actually smiled. In our standard commercial lease, Section 4, Paragraph 9 explicitly states that any unauthorized structural modification or tampering with the core utility panels by unapproved contractors is an immediate, non-negotiable breach of contract. It is an instant eviction trigger. It removes all grace periods. He thought he was taking control. In reality, he had just voluntarily stepped into the perfect legal trap I had set. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him without spending a single dime on lawyers. The satisfaction of my traps abruptly vanished at exactly 4:15 on a Thursday afternoon. The control room did not just beep, it screamed. A piercing, high-pitched klaxon echoed off the concrete walls, accompanied by a flashing crimson border on the central diagnostic monitor. This was not a minor bandwidth issue or a clogged filter. This was a catastrophic structural alert. I pulled up the schematics. The pressure sensors on the heavy industrial chemical lines running through the vertical shafts of the building were going completely crazy. The liquid nitrogen feed had spiked to 300% of its maximum safe operating pressure. I zoomed in on the architectural wireframe of the 6th floor. Bryce's unlicensed electricians had not just broken into the telecom box. They had bypassed the main utility corridor and physically spliced a commercial-grade cryotherapy chamber directly into the building's pressurized chemical main. My blood ran cold. Liquid nitrogen expands at a ratio of 1 to 694 when it hits room temperature. To manage that kind of volatile expansion, you need military-grade relief valves and reinforced titanium coupling. Bryce's amateur handyman had used standard brass plumbing fittings. Through the high-definition inspection cameras inside the utility shaft, I could see the thick white frost rapidly creeping up the brass joints. The primary safety valve was visibly vibrating, completely stripped of its threading. It was actively leaking. It was not just a leak, it was a ticking pneumatic bomb. If that valve blew, the sudden violent expansion of gas inside the enclosed structural column would create a localized explosion powerful enough to shatter the load-bearing concrete pillars on that side of the building. Innocent researchers working on the floors above and below would be crushed. Normally, dealing with a terrible tenant involves submitting a formal 30-day eviction notice through the county court system. You file the paperwork, you wait for a judge, you send certified letters. I realized instantly that 30 days was a luxury I did not have. We barely had 30 hours. The structural integrity of the entire facility and the actual lives of my legitimate scientists were in immediate jeopardy. I turned away from the camera feeds and accessed the deepest, most restricted directory of the building's central server. I bypassed the standard landlord-tenant lease agreements and opened the federal compliance database. I initiated the drafting of a biohazard quarantine protocol. This is a supreme, absolute authority granted only to the owners of Tier 1 medical research facilities by the Department of Homeland Security and the federal health agencies. In the event of an uncontrolled biological or chemical threat, normal civil rights are temporarily suspended. It grants the facility owner the unilateral power to magnetically lock down the infected zone, seal the ventilation, and seize all internal assets immediately, without a single court order. I began linking the thermal images, the pressure logs, and the illegal plumbing schematics directly into the emergency federal dossier. I needed to physically inspect the exterior vent on the ground level to ensure the nitrogen was not pooling in the public parking garage. I threw on my stained white coat, grabbed a heavy flashlight, and walked out into the damp evening air. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. The underground parking structure was mostly empty, echoing with the low hum of sodium vapor lights. As I knelt by the exhaust grate, two massive black sport utility vehicles silently pulled up behind me, blocking my path to the elevator. The doors opened, and 3 men stepped out. 2 of them were enormous private security contractors wearing tactical vests over tailored suits. The third was Bryce. He looked exhausted and paranoid. The psychological warfare had clearly taken a toll. He had figured out that the network throttling and the environmental glitches were not random hardware failures. He knew someone inside the building was intentionally targeting his digital infrastructure. He just had the target completely wrong. "You," Bryce said, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. His voice was trembling with a mix of rage and sleep deprivation. I stood up slowly, keeping my face perfectly blank. I wiped a smudge of grease off my cheek. "I saw you lurking around the utility closets earlier this week," Bryce snapped, stepping uncomfortably close. "I know building management is too stupid to run diagnostics, but you maintenance rats. You always have master keys. You always know where the server cables are. Who paid you? Which of my competitors paid you to mess with my routers?" "I do not know what you are talking about, sir," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly submissive and quiet. "I just clean the vents." One of the bodyguards stepped forward, invading my personal space, towering over me. He intentionally knocked my heavy metal flashlight out of my hand. It clattered loudly onto the concrete floor. Bryce leaned in, his face contorted into an ugly, vicious sneer. The smell of expensive cologne and sheer panic rolled off him. "Listen to me very carefully. You pathetic little trash collector," he hissed. "I am closing a $10 million funding round tomorrow night. If my network drops out again, or if I see your dirty face anywhere near the 6th floor, you will not just lose this miserable minimum wage job. I will make sure you disappear from this city. You will never work again. Do you understand me? I will ruin your entire life." He did not wait for an answer. He signaled his guards, got back into his luxury vehicle, and sped off toward the exit ramp, leaving me standing alone in the cold garage. I looked down at my dropped flashlight, then slowly back up at the empty space where his car had been. A strange, total calmness washed over me. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Up until this very second, I was simply going to execute the quarantine, shut down his illegal clinic, and hand the evidence over to the federal authorities quietly. I was going to be professional. But looking at the tire marks he left on the concrete, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of his threat echoed in my mind. He believed he held the power of life and death over the working class. He truly believed his money made him a god. I picked up my flashlight. I did not just want to evict him anymore. An eviction is a piece of paper. I wanted total, absolute annihilation. Bryce wanted to play his games in the dark. I decided I was going to drag his entire fraudulent existence into the blinding light. Tomorrow night, during his lavish summit, he would not just lose his office, his entire criminal career, his fake billionaire persona, and his fragile ego were going to be buried alive, and it was going to happen live, on his own cameras, in front of the exact people he was trying to impress. Friday evening arrived with a sickening display of excessive wealth. The 6th floor of the Nebula Research Park had been entirely transformed for the VIP Biohack Summit. The standard fluorescent lighting was replaced with pulsing, ambient purple and gold light emitting diodes. The faint scent of electrical ozone from yesterday was heavily masked by an overwhelming cloud of imported floral arrangements and expensive botanical diffusers. The room was absolutely packed. There were at least 80 people crowded into the main suite, a ridiculous mix of Silicon Valley venture capitalists, minor Hollywood celebrities clinging to their youth, and self-proclaimed longevity influencers recording every single angle on their phones. Professional camera crews had set up massive tripods in the corners, live streaming the entire summit to tens of thousands of desperate followers online. I was right in the middle of it all, hiding in plain sight. I had traded my stained white lab coat for the crisp black uniform of the third-party catering company Bryce had hired. I wore a tight black apron, a pristine white button-down shirt, and my hair was slicked back tightly into a neat knot. I was pushing a heavy silver tiered cart loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne. No one looked at my face. To the ultra-rich, service workers are just moving furniture. I slowly navigated the cart through the sea of designer suits and expensive silk dresses, positioning myself perfectly adjacent to the main presentation stage. Beneath the crisp white linen draped over the bottom shelf of my cart, resting right next to the backup ice buckets, was a heavy military-grade tactical tablet. The crowd quieted down as the ambient music faded into silence. Bryce stepped onto the raised acrylic platform, bathed in a dramatic white spotlight. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit and a discreet headset microphone, looking every bit the tech messiah he believed himself to be. Behind him, positioned like a holy relic, was the massive cryotherapy chamber his unlicensed electricians had illegally spliced into my building's main chemical lines just 24 hours ago. It was glowing with internal blue lights, hissing softly with stolen liquid nitrogen, a monument to his absolute fraudulence. "Welcome, pioneers of the new age," Bryce began, his voice projecting smoothly through the high-end speakers. He paced the stage, gesturing grandly to the glowing machine. For thousands of years, humanity has accepted aging as an inevitability, a tragic decline. But I stand before you tonight to declare that aging is merely a disease, and like any disease, it can be cured. Inside this very room, we are harnessing cutting-edge thermal and cellular regeneration technology that will literally rewrite your biological clock. We are not just extending life, we are taking absolute control of it. He was incredibly convincing. I watched the millionaires in the front row nodding along, completely mesmerized, practically ready to write him checks for $10 million on the spot. Bryce turned to walk across the stage, letting his gaze sweep the room to ensure every live stream camera was capturing his good side. As he scanned the front row, his eyes locked onto me. I was standing perfectly still next to my champagne cart. I saw the exact moment of recognition flash across his face. He remembered the dirty maintenance worker from the parking garage. A cruel, opportunistic spark lit up his eyes. He decided to turn my presence into a spontaneous marketing tactic. "Just look around you," Bryce said, pointing his finger directly at me. The camera operators immediately pivoted their lenses, broadcasting my face to the internet. "Look at the people who do not have access to this technology. Look at the people who spend their lives carrying out menial labor, aging rapidly, their bodies breaking down from stress and poverty. That catering girl right there, do you want your cellular future to look as worn out and pathetic as hers, or do you want to join me in immortality?" A low, polite chuckle rippled through the crowd. Dozens of wealthy investors turned around to stare at me with varying degrees of pity and disgust. I did not blush. I did not look away. I simply offered him a faint, razor-thin smile. His words meant absolutely nothing to me. He was a ghost talking to the living. While the crowd laughed at the poor catering girl, I calmly reached beneath the white linen of my cart and pulled out the thick, rubberized tablet. I woke the screen. My customized administrative dashboard was already running. Over the past 12 hours, I had meticulously compiled the ultimate kill shot. I had linked the thermal security footage of his midnight smuggling, the real-time power grid data showing his massive theft of utilities, and the definitive proof of his fake medical credentials. I included the exact time-stamped logs of him flushing biohazardous blood waste into the municipal sewer system and attached the audio recordings of his unhinged rants. Every lie he had ever told since he signed the lease was neatly organized into a single, highly encrypted data packet. This digital bomb was pre-addressed and routed through a secure federal server, ready to fire directly to the Emergency Response Division of the United States Food and Drug Administration, the Regional Environmental Protection Agency, and the local police department. The air in the room was warm and thick with expensive perfume and blind arrogance. Bryce turned back to the crowd, raising his hands to accept their applause, completely oblivious to the fact that his universe was about to end. The silence in my head was absolute. The storm was ready. Now, I want a volunteer from the audience to experience the genesis of their new life, Bryce announced, turning dramatically toward the massive glowing cylinder. He reached out, his hand hovering over the sleek touch panel that controlled the stolen liquid nitrogen flow. The room held its breath. The professional camera crew zoomed in tight on his manicured hand. This was it, the absolute peak of his hubris. Beneath the crisp white linen of my catering cart, my thumb rested over the glowing red icon on my military-grade tablet. I did not hesitate. I pressed Execute Protocol. The response was instantaneous and violent. Every single ambient purple and gold light emitting diode in the suite instantly died. The custom playlist of meditation music was severed, leaving a jarring, echoing silence that lasted exactly 1/2 of a second. Then, the ceiling erupted. Blinding, strobing crimson emergency lights bathed the entire room in the color of raw panic. A deafening, mechanical slam echoed from the perimeter of the room as heavy steel magnetic locks engaged simultaneously. The main glass doors sealed. The reinforced windows locked. The ventilation grills overhead snapped shut with the metallic clatter of a prison gate. The panicked murmurs of the billionaires were drowned out by the cold, emotionless voice of the building's artificial intelligence system booming through the overhead speakers. Warning: unidentified chemical leak and unlicensed medical equipment detected. Biohazard quarantine protocol initiated. Total lockdown in effect. Before anyone could process the automated voice, the Central Environmental Control System executed its emergency safety purge on Bryce's illegally spliced equipment. The building seized absolute control of his machine, with an explosive, terrifying hiss. The safety valves on his cryotherapy chamber blew wide open. A massive, blinding cloud of sub-zero white vapor violently erupted from the base of the unit, completely engulfing the stage. The illusion of the luxurious health summit shattered instantly. The wealthy investors, who just 60 seconds ago were mesmerized by the promise of eternal youth, absolutely lost their minds. They shrieked in genuine terror. Women in silk dresses and men in $10,000 suits shoved each other aside, scrambling desperately away from the thick white fog, terrified they were going to suffocate or freeze to death. The live stream cameras captured every second of the humiliating stampede. Bryce was frozen in shock, coughing violently as the freezing fog washed over his designer suit. He slapped wildly at the control panel of his machine, but the digital screen was dead. He was completely locked out. I abandoned my cart. I walked calmly through the shrieking crowd, my black boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I stepped up onto the acrylic platform. Bryce stared at me, his eyes wide and uncomprehending, as I reached out and firmly snatched his dead, useless microphone right out of his trembling hand. I reached into the pocket of my apron, pulled out my master access card, and tapped it against the emergency intercom panel wired directly into the stage podium. The entire building's public address system hummed to life, carrying my voice not just through the room, but straight into the live stream audio feeds. "Bryce," I said, my voice echoing off the concrete walls with absolute authority. "Under Section 8 of the Federal Biomedical Safety Code and Paragraph 12 of your commercial lease, your tenancy is hereby terminated immediately." Bryce staggered backward, clutching his chest, his face draining of all color. He looked from my face to the flashing red lights, his mind finally making the agonizing connection. I am Stella Rivera, I continued, staring directly into his terrified eyes, owner and chief executive officer of the Nebula Research Park, and you are trespassing on my property. The sheer psychological collapse on his face was beautiful to witness. The arrogant tech messiah, who had threatened to destroy my life in a parking garage, suddenly realized that the dirty minimum wage janitor he had been mocking all week was the architect of his entire universe. I held his bandwidth, I held his oxygen, I held his freedom. You cannot do this, Bryce whispered, his voice cracking, completely forgetting the cameras recording his public humiliation. I have investors. I have rights. You have a federal indictment, I corrected him coldly. Right on cue. The magnetic locks on the main double doors disengaged with a heavy clack, opening just wide enough to let the authorities breach the perimeter. A tactical squad from the Environmental Protection Agency Hazardous Materials Division, fully suited in bright yellow protective gear, stormed into the room alongside 4 heavily armed local police officers. Nobody move, step away from the machinery, the lead officer roared, leveling his flashlight through the dissipating white fog. The police moved with brutal efficiency. They bypassed the crying celebrities and the stunned venture capitalists. Marching straight up to the stage, they grabbed Bryce by the shoulders of his midnight blue suit, spun him around, and slammed metal handcuffs onto his wrists. The cold click of the restraints was broadcast live to his entire digital audience. As they dragged him off the stage, his empire in ruins and his reputation permanently destroyed. Bryce looked back at me one last time. There was no anger left in him. There was only the crushing, absolute realization that he had played his arrogant game in the wrong house, against the wrong god. I stood under the flashing red lights, holding his microphone, and gave him the exact same polite, razor-thin smile I had given him in the lobby. It only took one click. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.